He thought her distance was cruelty, but distance is not coldness. Distance is the crucible where illusion burns and truth is revealed. When the shadow is faced, the self is born, and she, silent, trembling, luminous, stands on the edge of her becoming. For most of her life, she has been taught that love means merging, that devotion means dissolving, that to be chosen, she must become small enough to fit inside someone else's hunger. So she folds her fire. She swallows her intuition. She shapes herself to the expectations that keep her safe but unseen. Yet deep in the marrow of her being, something ancient stirs, a quiet rebellion against this slow death of authenticity. The feminine wound is not weakness. It is the ache of disconnection from her own soul. The masculine wound is not dominance. It is the terror of insignificance when met with real power. Together, these wounds weave the dance of projection, the game where he chases what he cannot hold, and she surrenders what she was never meant to lose. In every generation, this wound takes new form. In hers, it is the polished cage of self-improvement, the endless becoming that never arrives. The scrolling, the comparing, the pleasing, each a ritual of avoidance. For if she were to stop, even for a moment, she might hear the silence beneath her striving. And in that silence lives the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is everything she has exiled in order to belong. Her anger, her eroticism, her ambition, her grief, all buried beneath the persona she performs. But what she represses does not disappear. It waits. It whispers through dreams, through attraction, through sudden outbursts of rage or longing. The shadow is the unlived life pressing against the skin, begging to be seen. When a woman finally turns toward her shadow, she does not become darker. She becomes whole. The illusions fall away, the ones that told her she must be soft to be loved, silent to be respected, pleasing to be safe. This is the beginning of individuation, the sacred work of becoming oneself. The ancients called this process initiation. Jung called it the journey toward the self. In myth, it is the descent into the underworld. Persephone, Inanna, Psyche, each must face what was hidden to claim her throne above. The descent is not punishment, it is transformation. The death of the false self that makes space for the eternal one. She meets her shadow not in grand moments but in quiet confrontations. When she says no and feels the quake of guilt. When she looks in the mirror and sees both beauty and rage. When she loves a man who cannot meet her depth and must choose herself instead. Every choice that honors truth over comfort is a small death and a small resurrection. The queen archetype is born here, not from conquest but from consciousness. Her throne is not power over others but sovereignty over her own inner world. She no longer seeks approval, she embodies authority. Her silence is not submission, it is command. Her absence is not rejection, it is discernment. She knows that to lead is to stand alone sometimes, rooted in integrity when others bend to validation. Picture her now. She sits across from him, the man who once defined her worth. He waits for her to explain, to apologize, to soften her boundaries, but she does not. She breathes. She watches. Her eyes are not cruel, only clear. He feels the gravity of her stillness, and for the first time his own emptiness echoes back to him. The shadow he projected onto her returns home. This is not revenge, it is alchemy. Because every projection must eventually be reclaimed. What he calls too much in her is what he fears within himself. What she calls heartless in him is the part of her that longs to be free from emotional slavery. The moment they see this, the spell of blame breaks. The mirror cracks, revealing the face behind the mask. You have felt this, haven't you? The tremor when you realize the people who hurt you were only showing you your own forgotten parts. It is terrifying. It is liberating. Because now you hold the power to change the story. No one can complete you. No one can destroy you. They can only reflect you until you learn to see clearly. So sit in silence tonight. Not the restless silence of waiting for a message, but the sacred stillness of your own presence. Feel the pulse beneath your skin. The warmth of life that needs no witness. This is you, unmasked, unperformed, undeniable. The self that was always there beneath the noise. Do not rush the process. The old self will fight to survive. It will whisper that you are too much, too cold, too different, but keep listening inward. The voice that feels calm, rooted, vast, that is truth. The one that pleads, panics, bargains, that is fear. Let the false die. Let the real rise. Because individuation is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming real. And reality, when seen through the eyes of the awakened self, is sacred. The woman who dares to face her shadow does not become untouchable, she becomes untamed. Her presence awakens what is sleeping in others. Her gaze cuts through pretense. Her silence demands honesty. The self is not a destination. It is the ground you return to when the masks fall away. The more you live from it, the less you need from the world. And that is when you become luminous, not because you are flawless, but because you are whole. The journey toward the self is not a straight ascent, but a spiral. Each turn brings you back to a familiar place, but with new eyes. The same wound greets you, wearing a different face. The same pattern whispers, daring you to respond differently this time. That is how the unconscious tests your readiness, through repetition, until you no longer react from survival but respond from awareness. The shadow does not vanish after being seen once. It waits, patient as the moon. It shifts, hides, reappears through new relationships, new ambitions, new disguises of control. That is its devotion, to ensure that you do not mistake awakening for completion. Every confrontation with the shadow is an invitation. Will you choose fear, or will you choose truth? He fears rejection. She fears abandonment. This is the primal split between the masculine and the feminine. The masculine seeks validation through conquest. To be chosen is to exist. The feminine seeks safety through attachment. To be held is to be real. But both are illusions, for neither conquest nor closeness can replace self-connection. So they mirror each other's wounds, binding through what they have not healed. He chases, she yields. He withdraws, she pleads. He dominates, she disappears. And beneath it all, both ache for the same thing, to be seen without performance. Yet to be truly seen requires vulnerability, and vulnerability terrifies those who still live in masks. This is where projection becomes a theater of pain. She projects her inner child onto him, the part that still believes love must be earned. He projects his lost tenderness onto her, the part that still fears powerlessness. They fall in love with what they've disowned, then blame each other for the disappointment that follows. It is not cruelty. It is unconsciousness. The psyche is trying to make visible what each has refused to face within. When she begins to awaken, the balance shifts. The queen starts to rise through her pain. She no longer craves his validation, but she still trembles at the emptiness it leaves behind. That emptiness is the portal. It is the womb of transformation, the place where the false identity dissolves and the soul begins to speak. At first, the voice of the soul is faint. It speaks through intuition, through quiet knowing, through the sense that something greater is guiding the chaos. But she resists. The mind clings to certainty. The ego clings to control. So the soul must sometimes tear what she clings to apart, not as punishment, but as initiation. Loss, heartbreak, betrayal, these are not curses. They are dismantlings. The queen cannot rule while chained to her dependencies. She must stand alone to know her true height. And when she finally does, she realizes that sovereignty is not isolation. It is clarity. The ability to love without losing oneself, to give without depleting, to stay open without collapsing. Imagine her again. The same woman who once chased reassurance now sits in stillness. The man who once triggered her fear of abandonment stands before her uncertain. He expects pleading, softness, the familiar surrender. But her gaze holds no demand, only truth. He senses it. She no longer needs him to feel complete. And paradoxically, that is what draws him closer, because freedom is magnetic. The witch awakens within her, the aspect of feminine power that transforms through mystery. The witch does not seek approval, she invokes transformation. Her power is not in seduction but in reflection. She mirrors the unconscious, forcing it into awareness. He sees himself in her eyes and feels both desire and dread, for she shows him what he cannot yet bear to know about himself. You have been her, haven't you? The one who loved too deeply, who felt too much, who was told she was intimidating. You dimmed your fire to be digestible. You softened your truth to be loved. But every time you did, your soul recoiled. Because authenticity cannot breathe in captivity. The witch within you mourned each false smile, each apology for existing too boldly. And now she is stirring. You feel it when silence becomes more satisfying than small talk, when solitude feels richer than conditional company, when you no longer chase closure because you've realized that peace was never theirs to give. That is her, the inner alchemist, transmuting pain into power, rejection into revelation. Shadow work is not about fixing what's broken. It's about integrating what was banished. The anger you suppressed holds boundaries. The grief you avoided holds compassion. The envy you denied holds direction. Every emotion carries encoded wisdom, waiting to be acknowledged. Integration is the art of letting all parts of you have a voice, without letting any one part rule. Tonight, let yourself feel without labeling. Sit with your emotions as if they were old friends returning from exile. Do not analyze. Do not justify. Simply witness. For awareness itself is the medicine. When the heart stops running from pain, pain loses its power to control. You are not becoming someone new. You are remembering who you are beneath conditioning. Individuation is remembrance, the soul reclaiming what the world convinced you to abandon. The queen, the witch, the lover, the huntress, they are not roles to perform. They are aspects of your totality, waiting to be harmonized. When these archetypes unite within, a sacred equilibrium is born. The outer world begins to mirror the inner. Chaos becomes clarity. Conflict becomes catalyst. And silence, once unbearable, becomes your sanctuary. When silence becomes sanctuary, the world begins to rearrange around it. People feel it before they understand it. The calm no longer pleads, no longer bends, no longer performs. It simply is. And that stillness unsettles those who need chaos to feel alive. The queen's silence, once mistaken for weakness, becomes a mirror that reveals everything false. But the path of individuation is not about dominance. It is about discernment. The awakened feminine does not reject the masculine. She reclaims her sacred polarity with him. In Jungian language, this is the dance between anima and animus, between soul and spirit, between being and becoming. When these inner opposites integrate, the psyche finds wholeness. Until then, she meets her animus through the men who cross her path, each one a messenger. The first teaches her need, the next teaches her illusion, another teaches her boundaries. Through them all, she begins to see the reflection of her own evolving consciousness. For every outer relationship is an inner conversation in disguise. At first, she mistakes projection for connection. She feels a magnetic pull, intense, consuming, faded. It feels like destiny, but it is really recognition. The shadow recognizes itself in another. What feels like passion is often the psyche's attempt to heal. And so, the deeper the wound, the stronger the attraction. It is not madness, it is memory. When she begins to see through this, she feels both grief and liberation. The fairy tale dissolves, and with it, her illusions of rescue. She realizes that love is not supposed to complete her. It is meant to reveal her, to strip away what she is not until only truth remains. This is the heartbreak that births the priestess. The priestess archetype carries sacred awareness. She walks between worlds, the seen and unseen, the conscious and unconscious. She no longer chases love as possession but as communion. To her, relationship is no longer transaction but transformation. She listens not to words but to energy, not to promises but to presence. In this stage, many retreat into solitude. They call it loneliness, but it is gestation. The psyche withdraws to integrate its fragments. In stillness, the old narratives unravel. The woman who once sought meaning in others begins to hear her own pulse as a hymn. Her body becomes temple, her intuition scripture, her breath prayer. But the ego resists this emptiness. It whispers, "You are being forgotten. You are falling behind. You are losing your spark." It fears silence because silence is where it dies. The ego thrives on noise, validation, comparison, control. The soul, however, is nourished by stillness. The deeper she sinks into silence, the more her intuition sharpens. There comes a night when she no longer reaches for distraction. She lies in the dark, breathing. There is no plan, no audience, no performance, only awareness. And in that quiet, she feels something vast and ancient rise within. It is not an emotion. It is recognition. The self, the eternal observer, the center beyond the storm, the one that watches without judgment. This is the threshold between the shadow and the self. Jung called it the confrontation with the unconscious. The Stoics called it the mastery of the mind. To meet one's own depths without running is the greatest act of courage. Seneca wrote, "He who conquers himself is the mightiest warrior." And here, in this quiet battle, she becomes that warrior. The self does not fight the shadow, it absorbs it. Like light through mist, it renders darkness transparent. What was once hidden becomes holy. The shadow's anger becomes the self's clarity. The shadow's fear becomes the self's compassion. Nothing is lost, everything is transmuted. She begins to notice subtle changes. Conversations that once drained her now end quickly. Arguments that once triggered her now dissolve into silence. She no longer explains herself to be understood, for understanding is no longer her current. Peace is, and peace requires no permission. This is where many around her begin to react. Some will accuse her of arrogance, others of detachment. But they are not wrong. They are simply describing what they cannot yet name: sovereignty. Her energy no longer feeds the unconscious dynamics that once bound her. She no longer participates in the unconscious contracts of pain. When the witch within her merged with the priestess, something sacred occurred, the union of power and wisdom. Power without wisdom destroys. Wisdom without power fades. Together, they create magnetic stillness, the kind that commands without words. You have felt the edge of this power before. When you walked away without resentment. When you said no without explanation. When you smiled not to please but because peace had become your nature. That is sovereignty, not the arrogance of superiority, but the calm certainty of inner alignment. And yet the journey continues. Individuation is infinite because the self is infinite. There will be more shadows, new thresholds, deeper truths. But each time you return to the self, you do so with greater grace. The descent no longer feels like death. It feels like remembrance. The world will try to pull you back into distraction. It will tell you that to matter, you must be seen. That to be loved, you must be chosen. But you will know better. You will know that being seen means nothing if it costs your soul. That being chosen means little if you have not chosen yourself first. So when you feel the pull to shrink again, pause, breathe. Remember that silence is your crown. Stillness is your throne. The woman who owns her peace cannot be possessed. In the stillness of sovereignty, a new kind of love becomes possible. No longer born of need, it arises from fullness. No longer seeking to merge, it seeks to meet. It is not a bond of survival, but of reflection. A conscious meeting between two individuated souls who no longer confuse attachment with connection. This love does not ignite through chaos. It unfolds through recognition. Two mirrors face each other not to lose themselves but to see more clearly. The queen and the king, not as archetypes of hierarchy, but as equals in awareness. The feminine no longer bends to be chosen. The masculine no longer conquers to be worthy. Both have faced their shadows, and so both have learned reverence. Reverence for truth, for freedom, for the mystery of the other. For the dance between intimacy and individuality that defines real union. The queen no longer mistakes solitude for lack. She understands that solitude is sacred ground, the soil in which discernment grows. From that ground, she chooses not out of hunger, but from clarity. And yet her clarity does not make her invulnerable. It makes her real. Vulnerability remains, but it no longer feels like danger. It feels like depth. She can open her heart fully, knowing that if love leaves, she remains whole. Because she is no longer trying to be loved, she is love in form. This is the paradox of individuation. The more you become yourself, the more you can love without losing yourself. Jung knew this truth well, that the union of opposites, once achieved within, changes how one meets the world without. To love another deeply while remaining free is the highest alchemy of the soul. Yet this stage too brings new trials. The ego, now subtler, tries to claim the crown of awakening. It whispers, "You are enlightened, you are beyond others." But true sovereignty carries no superiority. It walks in humility, the quiet knowing that every being is a reflection of the same divine source, just wearing different wounds. The queen bows not in submission but in wisdom. She knows that even her shadow is sacred, even her past was holy, even her pain was part of her preparation. She remembers the nights she begged for love that drained her, the days she silenced her truth for peace that never came. She honors them not with shame but with gratitude, for without those fractures she would never have found her form. Without the shadow there is no self, without descent no ascension. In this awareness, compassion deepens. She no longer judges the man who could not meet her depth. She sees that he, too, was meeting his shadow through her. He feared rejection because rejection mirrored his own self-abandonment. She feared abandonment because abandonment mirrored her own self-rejection. Both were prisoners of projections until the mirror cracked. And now, in the fragments of that mirror, she sees truth shimmering like gold. She no longer chases understanding, she embodies it. No longer explaining what cannot be taught, she simply lives it. Her presence becomes her teaching, her energy, her language. When she enters a room, people feel the equilibrium she carries, the calm that does not collapse, the strength that does not harden. This is the stage of the oracle, the feminine consciousness that speaks truth without woe. RDS. Her silence becomes prophecy, her stillness revelation. She no longer argues with reality, she collaborates with it. She knows that everything she attracts is an echo of her frequency. So she tends to her energy the way a queen tends to her garden, with devotion, not control. There is an art to this way of living. It requires vigilance but not fear, awareness but not obsession. She has learned that control is the shadow of trust. And so she surrenders, not to others but to alignment. She lets go of what resists her truth, not as punishment but as purification. You can feel it too, can't you? The relief that comes when you stop begging to be understood. The peace that descends when you release what no longer resonates. That feeling is not detachment, it is return. You are returning to the self, to the unbroken core that no one could ever take. Sit with that tonight. Let your body remember what safety feels like when it comes from within. No performance, no seeking, just breath, just presence. Notice how the world softens when you no longer grasp at it. Notice how people respect what you no longer need from them. That is power, not domination, but detachment from illusion. The Stoics spoke of this too. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. The woman who masters her inner world no longer needs to manipulate the outer. Her stillness paints her reality. Her thoughts become law because they arise from alignment, not anxiety. As her consciousness stabilizes, she begins to notice the sacred rhythm beneath life's chaos, the synchronicities, the intuitive pulls, the gentle signs that whisper, "You are guided." She no longer needs certainty, for she lives by trust. She knows the self does not seek control, it is the current itself. And so she walks differently now, each step a declaration of presence, each silence a song. She has faced her shadow, and instead of being consumed by it, she has learned to dance with it. Her darkness no longer frightens her, it gives her depth. Her pain no longer defines her, it gives her purpose. The woman who once feared being alone now knows solitude as sanctuary. The man who once sought validation now seeks truth. Both have tasted the essence of the self, and once that taste is known, The search for substitutes ends. Because wholeness is not an achievement. It is the natural state revealed when illusion falls away. There comes a moment, quiet and almost imperceptible, when the seeking stops. It is not triumph but surrender. The queen removes her crown. The witch extinguishes her flame. The priestess lays down her veil. And in that stillness, something even deeper emerges, the self naked and radiant, needing no title to exist. It is here in this inner silence that the final paradox unfolds. You realize that everything you were chasing, the validation, the love, the belonging, was never lost. It was simply buried beneath the noise of who you thought you had to be. The shadow was never your enemy. It was your messenger disguised as fear. Every heartbreak, every rejection, every moment of loneliness, it was all the psyche's way of leading you home. Individuation is not about becoming special. It is about becoming whole. It is the slow, sacred process of reconciling opposites, the lover and the loner, the sinner and the saint, the chaos and the calm. It is the death of the persona and the birth of authenticity. The ego calls it loss. The soul calls it liberation. As Jung wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The light you seek is not found above, but within. It burns quietly at the center of your being, waiting for you to turn inward. The moment you do, the search ends, not because you found something new, but because you finally remembered what was never gone. The final integration begins when you no longer resist what you once judged. The parts you called unworthy, selfish, dramatic, they were simply unloved aspects of you. To face them without flinching is to practice the art of divine acceptance. Not the kind that excuses everything, but the kind that includes everything. The kind that says, even this belongs. This is the self's gaze, steady, unconditional, expansive. It does not reject the shadow, it redeems it. It does not destroy the ego, it teaches it reverence. The ego, once terrified of death, becomes the servant of something greater. It stops clinging, starts trusting. The war within dissolves into cooperation. What once felt like inner chaos becomes inner choir. From this harmony arises a new rhythm of being. She no longer strives for purpose, she is asterisk purpose. Every action flows from awareness. Every word carries weight, not because she forces it, but because it comes from presence. This is what the ancients called asterisk logos asterisk, the voice of the divine made human. When she speaks now, people listen, not because her tone is louder, but because her energy is clean. There is no manipulation in her truth, no desperation in her love. She can look at another and see not an object of desire, but a soul on its own pilgrimage. She can love without needing and release without resentment. Her attachments have transformed into devotion, the kind that gives freely because it knows loss is illusion. Imagine her walking through a crowded world. The same noise surrounds her, yet she moves as if untouched by it. Not detached, but anchored. Not indifferent, but invulnerable. The chaos outside mirrors the calm within. This is what individuation births, the capacity to remain whole in the presence of contradiction. You might wonder if such serenity makes her untouchable. It does not. It makes her deeply human, because now she can feel everything without drowning in it. She can cry without shame, rage without projection, love without fear. Emotion no longer overpowers her. It moves through her like weather across open sky. And here lies the final teaching. To live from the self is not to escape humanity, but to sanctify it. Every mundane act becomes ritual. Every conversation becomes prayer. Every silence becomes symphony. She has descended through shadow, ascended through awareness, and returned to the world as both student and source. This is the circle completed. The woman who once fragmented by survival now stands integrated by soul. The witch, the queen, the priestess, all now facets of one diamond consciousness. Her power no longer seeks to control, it creates. Her love no longer seeks to bind, it blesses. You have walked this path too, even if you didn't realize it. Every time you refuse to betray your truth, You took a step toward the self. Every time you faced pain instead of numbing it, you peeled back another layer of illusion. Every time you chose silence over reaction, integrity over approval, solitude over performance, you were being initiated. Now the initiation completes itself. You stand before the mirror not to correct but to recognize. You see the eyes that once begged now burn with clarity. You see the posture that once shrank now grounded in calm. You see the softness that remains not weakness but wisdom. You do not need to prove, to explain, to win. You simply are. There is nothing left to chase, nothing left to fix. The shadow has served its purpose. It has led you to the throne within, the unshakable core of your being where peace is not an achievement but a homecoming. And so the paradox resolves. The woman who once feared being alone now communes with the infinite. The man who once feared insignificance now moves with purpose born of presence. Both have found what all seekers seek, the still point within the storm. The self was never something to reach. It was always something to remember. The moment you stop running from your shadow, you find it standing beside you, whispering, "Welcome home." The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.